Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Angela, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session, Scaling Insights Faster for Future Success, with William Cimarosa, SVP Market Research at Suzy, and Scott Litman, co-founder at Lucy. A couple of points before we begin. The webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to you after the webinar. You can ask questions during and also at the end of the session by sending them through the questions widget. Now, our platform has a few functions which I'm just quickly going to walk you through. This slide shows where you can send your questions, see the slides, and a group of widgets. Now, these widgets offer you the chance to interact with your fellow webinar attendees through the group chat or to interact with the platform and the content. The console can be adjusted with the windows made bigger or smaller, so just click on the icons and see what happens. It's designed for you to get everything out of our time together, so please just experiment and have a little bit of fun. Right, let me start by introducing you to our speakers. Will leads the market research practice within the Suzy Center of Excellence. He's focused on developing data-driven insights that drive brand growth for clients. Will's previous experience includes global insight and strategy positions within CPG and pharmaceutical companies such as Mead Johnson Nutrition and GlaxoSmithKline. Scott is an entrepreneur in search of new ways technology can advance organizations' missions. Today, Scott is the co-founder of Lucy. Now, Lucy helps enterprise teams make the most of their data. Built for the Fortune 1000, she reads, listens, watches, and learns all of the data you share with her, a one-stop AI-powered knowledge platform for all the information you own and license. So, gentlemen, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Angela, and thanks, ESOMAR, again for having us. I think this is about our fourth or fifth event together. And to the audience, thank you for joining us today. It's been great for Lucy and Suzy to team up, both here and what we're working on for our shared customers. Lucy and Suzy, they get along really well. We're very complementary to one another in the marketplace. And today we're looking forward to sharing our perspective with you on scaling insights faster for future success. So just start with a perspective. Over the last 2 years, wherever you live on the planet, we've all had the shared and common experience of enduring this pandemic. It has changed how we do business. From a business standpoint, things like work from home and hybrid work models are really new and unique, at least at the scale they've been practiced at. There's been an increased velocity to digital transformation and ultimately an increased reliance on technology. But it's also changed the consumer landscape. At times, consumer behavior has changed radically. At certain phases focused purely on essentials. You think about the runs on certain items that were, 2 years ago, so commonplace, but then disruptions in the global supply chain and how that's forced consumers to make changes in purchase behavior and how it's created scarcity, sometimes of once favored products and brands. As research and insight professionals, it's forced us to move faster, to be more dynamic, and to be more agile. Today, William and I are going to chat through a series of themes and give our perspective on what we're seeing from our respective points of view. And so the first item we'll hit on is this theme that the pandemic has created scarcity everywhere. And how is that impacting business and particularly insight professionals? And so when I think about scarcity, the first thing I see is the HR challenge. It's really hard to find people to take on jobs. We've had certain open recs for roles for months, and and there's just a scarcity of available resources. But we've seen this in other ways. We've seen client projects impacted. We've seen clients where, well, we're going to do this next thing, or kick up this next phase once we hire this resource, and where it's the sort of thing where a couple of years ago you'd say, well, all right, they'll have that, they'll move somebody into the spot in 3 weeks, and it takes 3 months. We've seen this as we've looked to bring in certain vendors that they don't have, companies sometimes don't have the bandwidth to take on what's next. We've seen challenges where whether it's customers, vendors, partners, through scarcity, have had to dial back services or have changes in their response times. The scarcity side, from an HR standpoint, has had all kinds of impacts on every part of the ecosystem, whether it's in your business or those outside. But ultimately, to the insight professional, I think the real push then is that there's an expectation to do more ultimately with less time. That, when, the business still has to move forward. It still has to, get things done. We still have to sell products. We still have to run the next project. But all of a sudden, instead of, 4 people available, there's 3. Or instead of 5, there's, 2. And yet those people still have to figure out how to get at it. And so anyways, we're seeing all kinds of impact around scarcity that ultimately is affecting bandwidth, time, availability, and what people can get done. It is most typically some of the best solutions are how to use technology to drive efficiency and overcome that. But it's a tall order, I think, for every business, and it certainly has had an impact on the profession that is shared by the insight professionals. William, in what ways have you seen the relationship between brands and consumers evolve?
I'd like to continue on with the issue of scarcity, really. The relationship between brands and consumers are happening when we're short on staff, but there's more stuff that's happening than ever, right? And it's important now to understand why consumer behaviors are changing and how. But you've got less people and less resources in this environment of scarcity, right? The other thing that's happening is that scarcity is just an example. Supply chain shortages, COVID, more and more is changing quicker, right? Consumers are changing behaviors at rates like we've never seen before. If you think about the modern society in 2022, there's more media channels than there ever were before, more retail channels than there ever were before. There's more choice. There's more noise out there. There's more communication, and there's more ways to make choices, whether it's scarcity, COVID, inflation, the next big thing. Consumer behavior is going to continue to change at accelerating paces. We need to figure out how to keep up. We need to know what behaviors are changing and why, and what relationships are our brands going to play in driving the business. At the end of the day, you need people to try your brand for the first time, to grow your penetration. You need to keep them loyal for share, and you need to drive velocity in some cases. But as consumer behaviors constantly change, and events will continue to do so, how those brands fit in for those specific behaviors is going to be continuously changing and being impacted as well. So what does that mean? Brands have really been looking for ways to stay better in touch with their consumers. We need to move quickly. We need to be agile, right? In an uncertain future, you need to be prepared with as much information as possible. One of the ways that we're seeing that now is getting more data, right? We have more data than we've ever had before. The next way that that's impacting the relationship between brands and consumers, though, is dealing with what data points are important. What do I really need to focus on during these times of change? You can have the largest and most accurate data set possibly available, but it's only useful if it's relevant. So what is the relevant information when it comes to your brand during these times of change? This is challenging enough as it is, right? But when we have scarcity and accelerating rates of change, we need to figure out ways to do this more efficiently. We need to work smarter, not harder. So how is that relationship between brands really evolving? We need to understand how our products fit into our consumers' lives, not just from a functional standpoint, but in terms of like a way of life, in terms of emotional end benefits as well, if we're going to continue to stay relevant. Because when times change, so does relevancy. So, Scott, how are brands using technology to democratize data at every stage of the consumer journey?
Yeah, I mean, just like you were mentioning, businesses are swimming in data. The question ends up being, can they act on it? Do they have the ability to get the right information into the hands of the right people when they need it? And so one of the things that we get to do is before we ever start with a customer, we conduct strategy sessions. Oftentimes I lead them. And the strategy sessions are really developing persona models to understand the needs of the user. If we look at any given team, whether it's research and insights leadership, whether it's the people that are deep in the trenches with the data, whether it's the audiences they support, we build persona models around these things, and we end up learning an awful lot about different businesses and how they handle data. I think I've run persona models for 100 different companies in the Fortune 1000 over the last 2+ years. I should say approaching 100. So here's some things we find, and the common struggles. The first, and I'll say this is a subset of maybe 15% of the companies, and I'm surprised we still see this, but sometimes data is just not even shareable. We meet with a company and they say, well, we don't have any centralized data storage, which boggles my mind. Like how does IT and security that needs backups and clients and things like that allow for that? And yet data lives on personal OneDrives or, the C drive, D drive, of a laptop. But if there are, 10 to 100 people in insights and hundreds to thousands in marketing, and one person has critical data on something that's inaccessible because it's a personal OneDrive or something that's storage for them, the data is limited to an audience of one. Thankfully, we don't see that a ton, but there's a notable, kind of a 1 in 6 businesses, it's still that's where data's at. What's more typical, though, is that companies have data that lives in environments like SharePoint. Data that is set up and managed by IT. Access is controlled properly. Who should have, who should get access to things, and that access might be based on team, it might be based on role, it might be based on business unit, it might be based on geography. But ultimately, data is living in silos. If I'm an insights professional in the UK, is there valuable data that's happening from colleagues of mine in New York? Likely, yes. But is it accessible to me? Is it bound by being in a silo because of geography? Or if I'm on an insights group working in health food for yogurt products, and somebody else is in an insight group for a different area of health, do they have access to the same data, or is it siloed? And we find many, many silos that exist. And the reality is that for people that, when I say SharePoint, this could be OneDrive for Business, it could be Office 365, this could be Ignite, Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, although we see SharePoint and Teams by far the most. And people say, I can't find anything in SharePoint. And the challenge to that is not that they can't find what they already know exists. They can't find what they think should exist and was done by some of the hundreds or thousands of other people in the organization, and they just can't get to it. Beyond that, access is limited by bias. Companies oftentimes have subscription to great outside vendors, the e-marketers and Mintels and Hartmans and Euromonitors and all that. But if my bias is I just log in and I start with Mintel, I might not go to my other subscriptions. If my bias is I love eMarketer and I don't, I log in there and I don't go to my other subscriptions, because who has time to log into everything and to search everything? People don't. And so the is state is, for most companies, there are barriers that limit the ability to democratize data. Now, and so those are the factors that are the limiters. Now, we had an ESOMAR event. Actually, we've had two of them with PepsiCo, where we've talked specifically about this. And PepsiCo is an extremely visionary company. For us at Lucy, and I believe at Suzy, we're both very fortunate to get to work with them. And they have been just a tremendous leader in the approach of blowing up the silos, recognizing that insights from the right source. They need to get insights from the right source to the right people as quickly as possible. And that means breaking down these barriers. The time that is spent for the insight professional to try to find information is incredibly low value and time consuming. The value of having the right information in the hands of the right people so they can act on it and use insights effectively is incredibly important. And so what we really look at is how can we help customers break down those barriers, break down those silos, democratize data, recognize the company has paid greatly to own the data, license the data, or bring in excellent tools. And it shouldn't be an exercise of going through 20 logins. It needs to be, how do I get the right information to the right people at the right time? So that's our perspective.
Remember what that means for an insight in general. Like when we talk about data and access to different pieces of data, insights tend to be considered almost like things that are tangible, like that you can catch with a net. But having the right data to get in one place quickly and easily allows you to change the way you see and understand a topic. And if you don't break down those silos and bring in the relevant data, the insights don't happen, right? So how do we do more with less? It's getting the right types of data in front of the right person, because an insight isn't an external thing. It's internal. It changes the way you and your team understand things.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So, William, how has brand loyalty evolved in this environment?
Well, one of the insights that I've seen, helping customers understand how consumer behaviors are changing, and one of the insights and internal things that we've learned is loyalty is really a challenge right now, especially when there's been supply chain issues, right? Loyalty, one thing that we're finding from a lot of derived studies, like we are also running lots of segmentation or derived driver analysis where we look at unstated behavior. We actually derive what is making someone likely to be satisfied or to try a brand or to keep them from switching brands. And that's where loyalty comes in. And one of the things that's constantly coming up is word of mouth, more so than ever. Remember, we have overflows of data as well, but so do consumers. And in that environment, it's hard to know what to decide and what to choose. You're being barraged with all different types of messaging. It's been very interesting to see the importance of word of mouth in terms of driving overall loyalty and even satisfaction, knowing that you're using something that someone has recommended to you, or we're even seeing if you're likely to recommend a brand that is also a driver of satisfaction. Loyalty is becoming something that is very much tied to what you hear from other people that you know and trust, right? So what does that mean? How can you generate word of mouth, and how can you help drive, like the overall recommendation? Because loyalty and word of mouth recommendations have really gone hand in hand in the last couple of years. It's been astounding, how much we've seen that popping up compared to in my past career. We're also seeing other issues that are coming up in terms of insights. And there are some things that we're seeing, particularly in terms of different generations, right? They're not all behaving the same way, and their behaviors are changing in more ways, and they're changing quicker and quicker, right? One of the most interesting aspects of this is emotional end benefits. If I think back to like when I first started my career over a decade ago, I'm not going to go into the exact details of that. I remember doing like claims or name, max diff type studies, and we always had to separate functional benefits from emotional benefits because they would always come to the top. It was like a universal thing. It just became a standard practice when going through those types of exercises, especially for product claims. What we're seeing now, especially since the pandemic, is we still do that because it's been part of our practice, but emotional end benefits are becoming way more important across all generations, and significantly so for the younger generations. It's no longer just about what your brand does. It's about how they feel at the end of it. That emotional end payoff is as, if not more important than it's ever been. And I think that's something that's going to continue to happen. As consumer behaviors change, we have more and more pressures in the day-to-day lives. We're seeking that emotional end benefit of whatever that product can provide for us, right? What are some of the key differences that we're seeing when it comes to brand loyalty? Is that there's a lot of differences now across different types of product categories. I implore you to look at what does my product do and how does it fit into a consumer's life, and what are the decisions that they have again, to make, and understand how it fits in, because we're seeing loyalty become more complicated by category. The one universal truth is that emotional end benefits are way more important than they've ever been, and they continue to be so. Word of mouth recommendation is becoming important when there's lots of noise. But then when you get to specific, verticals or category industries, I implore you to look at and really understand what's going on in your category. So how can we use technology to operate in more agile fashions? What we like to do is to take these ongoing business questions at Suzy and turn them into a feedback loop, right? What are these organizations doing to understand the evolving consumer, right? And it's to create this feedback loop. Are you guys having trouble with the slides?
No, just you skipped past one.
Oh, you think I would have the technical thing fixed after logging off? There we go.
I was going to comment on how our organization's using technology to operate in a more agile fashion. So for us, I'll say the first step is to recognize this isn't just about a single tool or technology. I'd love to say, go buy Lucy and you've got this. But really, Lucy's just part of a knowledge ecosystem. And the reality is that knowledge comes in many forms. A form of knowledge is in the documents. Businesses will have hundreds of thousands, millions of pages of content that lives in Teams or SharePoint in the forms of PowerPoint, PDF, Word documents, and the like. But the ecosystem also includes platforms like StarMind that help connect to the experts. It includes knowledge that comes from like Suzy, who's amazing at unlocking insights from consumers at light speed. It comes from the syndicated providers of data, those e-marketers and Mintels and Hartmans and Euromonitors, the Zappies and Black Swans and Knowledge Hounds. They're all part of that knowledge ecosystem. And our view is that it's important with an ecosystem that this all gets stitched together, that it operates cohesively, that you can't expect people to have, 20 logins. And even if you've got SSO, which so many businesses have, you still have 20 interfaces. And people have to remember which things to go to. So what we look at is if organizations are going to be agile, they need to get rid of the wasteful time of trying to navigate through all of the apps. They need to make sure their knowledge management, their knowledge systems are integrated and cohesive. And we look at Lucy as being a really key part of that. And so, William, we're going to jump into the consumer feedback loop. I want to be sensitive to time. We've got about 5-6 minutes left as well.
So by what we're doing is we're helping clients create these consumer feedback loops, right? You need to be able to have your ongoing business questions really answered and turned into consumer-facing questions. That's how you're going to be able to stay on top of all of these changes and really measure those behaviors, right? And that's something that we're working very hard to build out, right? Being able to quickly deal with maybe having to change a type of package because of a supply chain, quickly understand what are the impacts of that going to be to a consumer of your brand and of competing brands, right? Staying in tune with your consumer in real time is one of the ways that you can make sure that you're getting that relevant data at the right time in the right place. And doing it so in a way that works within your organization, right? Scott mentioned being able to quickly get that information and not have to spend a lot of time. One of the things that we think helps with different ways of using insights or models is things like subscriptions and technology, right? When I first started using Suzy, I was a client. And it was quicker for me to get a survey launched and the answer back than it was for me to get a purchase order made, right? In a world like that you're going to fall behind, right? Having a subscription where I can quickly upload pictures, target my audience, measure how they feel about the things that are going to impact them and the brand, and quickly inform my internal stakeholders in a timely manner is critical to staying ahead of a quickly changing culture.
Very cool. I know that we're tight on time, but I want to, we've been talking about all these themes, and I just want to show a little bit of what does it look like when it all comes together? And so we're just going to give a 45-second mini demo. And so you should be seeing on your screen Lucy. And if I was to ask Lucy a question like, why do people like Greek yogurt? And, Lucy is connected to all sorts of different sources of data. In this case, my Lucy's connected to about 750,000 pages of content, which is very small compared to a customer instance. But still, there's 21 sources, vendors like eMarketer and Global Web Index, surveys and Knowledge Hound. I've got Suzy integrated here. I've got 10 SharePoints. And so Lucy found answers from different documents. And if I took a moment to look through this, I'd see some real strong trends in health and wellness that are driving trends in Greek yogurt. So if I ask Lucy, what are the health and wellness attributes for yogurt, which I had asked her just before this meeting. And we'll see that along with the answers that were coming from documents, from like our SharePoint, we're also seeing the study that is dialed in from Suzy. And the idea is Lucy's using her AI to look across all of these 21 sources, bringing it together for the insights professional. So in one shot, she's saying, oh, I've got this great report that's in our SharePoint on CPG from page 12, but I've also got this amazing study, this 46-page study on trends in yogurt that was done by Suzy. And so just wanted to very briefly kind of show what does it look like for those that haven't worked in an integrated environment before where data is being fully democratized like this. Angela, I don't know, do we have time for at least one of the questions?
Well, Scott and Will, thank you so much for sharing your vision and your ideas. Yes, indeed. I know we're running a little late, but if you don't mind staying for one question, we'd really appreciate it. To our audience, please feel free to continue to send in your questions because Will and Scott will also be able to get back to you after the session. But for now, perhaps you can tell us, can you talk a bit more on how these concepts are applied to other groups outside of the research and insights teams?
Yeah, actually, I'll share our perspective because we really started our business in Lucy in research and insights, and that's been our core audience. Yet these data challenges exist in sales. They exist in leadership. They exist in call centers. They exist in on HR teams trying to support retention of institutional knowledge and support of new people coming in or people transitioning in jobs. And so we have found in many of our businesses that we're working in that while we start in research and insights, we find ourselves in other areas of the business where this same sort of idea of how can I pull together knowledge from all these different sources into one place ends up providing a very high value.
And we're seeing that it's actually elevating insights, right? Supply chain, right? The very aspects of the business need to know what's going on with the consumer to understand what's going on with demand, right? Should we be creating demand? Should we be pulling back on that if there's going to be a supply issue? Suddenly the demand for insights has increased, and having ways of quickly communicating with people who don't typically have those interactions is also something that this can very much help.
Well, a very big thank you, Will and Scott, for joining us today. And of course, to all of you for participating in this webinar. We really hope you've enjoyed your time with us. We do want to mention that 2022 is a very special year for ESOMAR. It's our 75th birthday. So please take a look in the resources widget to see how you can get involved and help celebrate this momentous occasion. We hope our birthday will allow us to be even more inclusive and diverse than ever before. So we have adjusted our pricing model to reflect this. Please just visit our site to find out more. Thank you again to everybody, and we look forward to seeing you in a future webinar. Bye.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, William. Thank you, Angela. And we'll see you all soon.
Thanks. Thanks, Scott.